Okay, good morning. We are, I'm told, on Chavdal Amud Aleph, the two dots, the second to last two dots, about 5 lines from the bottom. The Amar Rabbi Chanina, Ani Reisi, es Rabbi Shetol Tfilov. Rabbi Chanina testifies that he saw Rabbi that he used to hang up his tefillin. We already had before in the Gimel Beis that they said about Rebbe, it was a machlokes between Bar Kapar and Shimon ben Rebbe as to whether or not Rebbe, when he would say Shema, when he would give the shir, if he would repeat his Shema afterwards. So now we're learning something else about Rebbe's conduct around tefillah, and this is that he would hang up his tefillin. And what is the issue with hanging up the tefillin? Meisvei, is this true that Rebbe Chanina says that Rebbe would hang up his tefillin? Had toilet tefillah v'yitloy chayav. We know Rashi teaches that somebody hangs up the tefillin, and he's hanging up his life. Darshe chamurais amru. What are the darshe chamurais? Different understandings of what darshe chamurais are, but essentially it is either, like Rashi tells us in Shachim, it's people that are darshaning mikroy stumim, sort of psukim that are not so clear, or as the Rebbe Yana adds, people are darshaning margolius, they're darshaning like jewels out of these psukim. The pasuk tells us. It's a pasuk from the Tzechach. What does it mean that your life will be hanging in the balance? Is that tefillah? That's someone who's hanging up his tefillin. So you see that hanging up the tefillin is not something. Forget the fact that it's not encouraged. It's not permitted. It's a very unwise thing to do. So what does Rabbi Chanina mean that Rabbi is hanging up his tefillin? So the more answer like kasha it's the difference between hanging up the bottom versus hanging up the tefillin by the ritzuas. If you hang the tefillin, the bias, so the ritzuas are hanging down, so that's okay. If you put the tefillin on the peg by the ritzuas, so the bottom are hanging down, then that's what's terrible, and that's what means somebody's hanging up his life. That's one answer of the Gemara. The Gemara says the second answer, V'boy Sema, Loishna Ritzuav, Loishna Ktitza. There's no nafkamina between hanging up the tefillin by the ritzuas or hanging them up by the batim. Either way, aser. Either way, it's aser. V'chitala Rebbe, v'chitzatala. And what Rebbe was doing was hanging up the tefillin while they're in their case. So the Gemara says, Ihachi Maila Memra. What's then the teaching us? If you're telling us the Rebbe hung the tefillin up by the case, meaning his tefillin, as Rashi pointed out, were in a tick. They were in a bag. They were in whatever compartment they had in those days. And that compartment he was then putting on a peg. So what's the problem? What are you teaching us? In other words, when we come into these stories of these Meitzah Ravs, of the various different rabbis that we have, and we want to learn something out, either for the good or the bad or the ugly, either way, we are essentially attempting to learn something out from the story. If you recall back on Yanal from Yanal, we had the Maisa of Rabbi Shmuel and Blessed ben Azariah, that Rabbi Shmuel was leaning and Rabbi ben Azariah was standing. It came time for Shema, and Rabbi ben Azariah leaned down. It was the nighttime, and Rabbi Shmuel got up. So he said, Rabbi ben Azariah to Rabbi Shmuel, "What are you doing? What are you getting so odd for?" It's like if I say you have a nice beard, and you say, "Oh, it should be connected on mazikin." I'm lying down now to say the Shema, and you're jumping up. So he said, "Yeah, because you're doing like Beis Shammai." And I'm afraid that the students are going to see us what we're doing, and they're going to be passing the halacha deris based upon a story, a ma'aseh. So the situation, what we're saying here is that we can learn out from Rebbe how he hung up his tefillin. But if it comes out that Rebbe wasn't hanging up his tefillin, he was just hanging up the compartment where his tefillin were kept. So then, as we've already pointed out in the Gemara, where the Gemara had a story, the Gemara brought down a Maisa, where there was an edus about whether or not they had said the brachos of Shema. Which brachos did they say? So the Gemara said on your Dalet and Mabeis, Im came my asidusa de Rabchia Barashi. What's the evidence? What's the point of the story? If Rebbe's hanging up the compartment, there's nothing to learn out of it. It's pashut. Of course, you're allowed to do that. So says the Gemara, what's here to coming to teach me? Says the Gemara, I might have thought to say Tiboy Hanaf Gesefer Torah Kamashman. I might have thought that you're not even allowed to hang up the sack of the tefillin. Even the compartment that the tefillin are in is not allowed to be hung up. It has to be placed nicely down like you would place a Sefer Torah. Mashmalon, that's not a requirement. Mashmalon, now when it comes to tefillin, you do not have to keep it to the same level of cover like you would a Sefer Torah. So if it's in its compartment, then you're able to hang up that compartment. But the tefillin themselves, the button or the ritzua, should not allow to hang up the tefillin at all. Fine. Now I have another testimony. I should just point out that we have the Gemara back. Right? We have the Gemara back in Yechesam and Aleph. If you remember the Gemara told us over there, it was a situation that if in if someone was concerned about goyim or robbers, so the halacha was you could put him on the donkey, and you're able to even sit on it. You're able to even sit on it. You can sit on the atzamas of somebody. You could sit on a Sefer Torah. But obviously, that's talking about a situation when it was listed. That's talking about a situation when it was a concern of something. Here, obviously, we're dealing with a situation when there's no concern. If it was concern, of course, you could keep the tefillin or even the Sefer Torah in a manner that would be very different. All right, continues the Gemara, and the Gemara says that another story of Rabbi Chanina. So Rabbi Chanina says that I saw Rabbi that he would be burping, and he would be yawning, and he would be sneezing, and he would be spitting. When did he do this? He turned the page to Chavdal and Mez, and he would be touching his clothing, but he wouldn't be putting on his talons. So this is all talking about a situation of during davening. Rebbe would be davening Shemana Esrei. He had a very active Shemana Esrei. It sounds like he was sneezing, burping, belching, all these kind of things. What is it talking about? So we have to first understand a little bit more in the Gemara. But till we get there, I just want to point out that Rashi mentions that what is it about burping? The Rashi says, "V'reicha kireach hamaychal she'achal." Right, somebody who needs some tums. And he's burping up, it tastes like what he ate. Rashi also points out that what is the yawning? Is somebody is letting out air out of his mouth, like a person wants to sleep, or he wake up from his sleep and he's yawning. And roik, Rashi says, like somebody's spitting on the ground. All the different kinds of things, obviously not very honorable things to be doing, presumably while one is davening. Yet, what this clear testimony is very important, very consequential, is that Rebbe was doing it while he was davening. And that is obviously something we need to understand. How could Rebbe do this? So he would be doing all these various things, and then he would be rustling with his clothing. Rashi explains the Havir Hakina, Rashi says to remove the kina, right? Kina, we're going to be having in a few parashas, right? Lice, mosquitoes, bees, whatever it was, that was annoying him, that was gnawing him, that was biting him, etc. There happens to be a various machlokes in here as to how you understand these lines. But he wouldn't put on his talus. The Rashi says, what does it mean he wouldn't put on his talus? If his talus fell off when he was in the middle of davening, if he wouldn't be putting it back on, so that he shouldn't make a hefsek. That is to say, you notice, sometimes people daven, right? They have a lot of kavanah, and the talus that they're wearing is falling off, and they're busy going like this and like this. Whenever his talus would fall off, he wouldn't pick it up. The Ritva writes differently. The Ritva writes this as one of the possible approaches of what it means. But he also says that it could mean the Rebbe wouldn't wear a talus at all while he was davening. He would daven without a talus. Again, that sounds also a bit interesting. There's a third possibility, and the third possibility here is mentioned by the Rebbe Chananel. Hesed brings it down as well. And Rebbe Chananel doesn't understand as two separate things. What he understands it as one thing. Look at Taisus. Rabbi Chananel Pirish. The Chada Milsi. Rabbi Chananel says it's one thing. Pirish. Bebegdai is rustling with his clothing, meaning his talis, so that it shouldn't fall off his head. Right? How would you make sure that your talis wouldn't fall off your head? Your talis wouldn't fall. You would do the talis like the Dobavich, right? You would have your talis, and maybe this is the source of that again. I don't know. And you roll it up again and again and again underneath itself, so that when it's hanging up on the on the shoulders, it's not riding. Or the way we do it is we sort of we don't let it just stand flat, right? We sort of fold it up by going like this, which also is a way of holding it straight. If you just let it lie flat, then it's much easier for it to fold down because then nothing's holding it on. So Konji Merchanano, Mamashish Begida is tied together with Avalei Misativ. This person would, or I'm sorry, Rebbe would work to ensure that his talis would stay on during the Shemona Esrei by rolling it up in a way that it would stay on his head. But if it fall off his head, then he wouldn't pick it up. Because there'll be a hefsek. Even though you say, well, 1 second, it's not appropriate to have a talis lying on the floor, but it's not appropriate to interrupt Tishman Esrei, and that would be considered too much of a hefsek. Should point out the idea of wearing a talis on the head is in part and parcel the idea of what tifa is. As the famous Shuvah of the Radbaz, where the Radbaz says that you're supposed to wear the talis like the Bedouins, right? They're all covered up, like the face you just see like the top of the eyes, kind of thing. All right, so this I should point out that this is our three methods. We have Rashi, who understands it as talking about two separate things. Right? Mashmash b'bigdai is to get rid of the kina. Avalahim sa'atef means you want to pick up the talis. And Mashmash b'gidai, Rashi pointed out, is just moving, is just, sort of going like this or whatever, like, to get rid of the louse or whatever it is that's bothering. That said, the Ritva, the Mevi, and others, they go further. Not like Rashi. What does it mean to a mashish big day that they're getting rid of the lice, the nits, the flies, the whatever that's bothering them? The Ritva brings down the feel of makom erva in kino tzasei. Even makom erva, you were able to get rid of the itch, the scratching, whatever it was, of the thing that's bothering you. So we have that approach of Rashi, and then we have the approach of Ibn Chanal that understands all this not as talking about lice, it's all talking about the talis. And his understanding is that it's all talking about the talis to ensure that the talis doesn't fall off. And then we have the other approach of the Ritva that says that Avlai Masati meant he never actually put on a talis when he died. So those are the sort of the panoply of different approaches to understand this line of the Gemara. Here's the Gemara. And when Rebbe would yawn, he would put his hand over his mouth. Why? As Rashi says, so you shouldn't see his open mouth. It's kind of gross. I should point out again, the Ritva has a different girsa. Like the Ritva's girsa is like the Rif. The Ritva's girsa is they wouldn't put the hand on the mouth. Why? Because as the Ritva and the Rif explaining is because it's gaivadik to go like this. I'm not 100% sure why that's gaivadik to cover your mouth, but that's how they understand. So we see a maflag there as well. So this is all the conduct of Rebbe during Shemona Esrei. And now the Gemara wants to explore this. It says the Gemara, really? Meisvei, I'll ask you a question. Somebody raises his voice during the tefillah. What do you mean he raises his voice during the tefillah? He is davening loudly. The person is a small believer. So somebody raises his voice during the davening, I raise them in the Via Sheker. It's like from the false prophets. Somebody who belches, somebody who burps, and somebody who yawns. Is a very egotistical person. Somebody who is sneezing during the davening. Siman ra, it's a bad siman. And others say that this shows that he's a disgusting person. Somebody who spits during davening, it's like he's spitting before God, like before the king. So Mara now you see as a question, It sounds like very problematic, Rebbe's activities. Rebbe was burping, he was belching, and he was sneezing and yawning. All the things that Rebbe did, we're telling you now that those are all inappropriate things. We're telling you now that these are all inappropriate activities. So these are all inappropriate activities. So how did Rebbe do them? That's our question that we have right now. So the Gemara says, 1 second. We can answer Pasha. Bishlam a guy come a fag loy kasha kanla and sekanla ritzani. There's an afkamina between Einus and Ratzin. If you're Einus, you have to yawn. You're Einus, you have to burp. Right? You ever have a situation the yawn just comes out. So that's a situation where Rebbe was doing it. But L'Ritzonai, to yawn at will, or to burp at will, so that would be inappropriate activity, and that's what this Bryce is coming to say is not appropriate. Now, what's the question? You should ask yourself the following question. I don't understand. We brought down Rebbe Chanina. He's telling us a Ma'aser Rav. He's telling us, I saw Rebbe X, Y, and Z. This is what Rebbe did. This was the Hanhaga of Rebbe. And as I just pointed out already before, that if we're in a situation where um, we are unable to learn something out of the story because of the fact that it doesn't seem to be teaching us anything. Why isn't it teaching us anything? Because of the fact that the in this case the person was an ayinus. My aseidusa de Rabbi Chanina. What is the big evidence of Rabbi Chanina? Rabbi Chanina is telling us about the story of Rebbe. What do you mean, Rebbe? Rebbe was an Einus. The way it's coming out now in the Gemara, Rebbe was forced to burp. He was in a situation of Einus. He had a hiccup. He had a yawn, but he was forced to. It wasn't a situation where he chose volitionally, willingly to do so. So why are you learning out from this that why is Rebbe Chanina bringing this down as a witness testimony about what Rebbe used to do? If Rebbe burped because he was an Einus, so what are you learning out from it? You hear the question? So I'm not 100% sure what the answer would be, but maybe there was some element in between that one could detect, between being called an einus and being ruts, and maybe there's something else where Rebbe nevertheless allowed himself to burp and to yawn, where it wasn't 100% line, so we could learn something out of it. I don't have a better answer than that. The Gemara then continues. The Gemara says, what about itush? What about sneezing? Sneezing, we just saw that sneezing Rebbe would do during davening. And we know, as Rashi says, that ein itush el einsai. Everyone sneezes la'inus. It happens to be in this case, I'm not so sure. I've seen people who are able to hold back the sneeze, right? They're about to go, achoo, but they don't. They're able to go, and they're able to stop it. So maybe that's what the chiddush would be. So Rebbe didn't require himself to stop it. So the Gemara is asking, what about sneezing? Isn't that not allowed? You see that that's something that's considered to be inappropriate. Hamasatish b'tfilos is a siman ra, or is a nikar shehu mechur, like he's disgusting. So that the Gemara answers no. Misadish hamasatish lami loy kasha. The sneezing is also not a question. It's not a problem. Why? Because kan mil malo, kan mil mata. There's a difference between sneezing from the nose and passing gas from below. And what we're talking about that Rebbe would sneeze is Rebbe was sneezing, like from his nose, literally. So again, what do you learn out from it? It's an einus, so what are you talking about? As I just said, maybe there are people who are able to hold back the sneeze. The Rebbe didn't do that, so therefore you can learn out that you're not required to do so. But when we talk about a siman ra, it's not a siman ra. It's not a siman ra at all. Siman ra has nothing to do with the nose. That would be if somebody's passing gas. That would be somebody who's called makur because he's passing gas. Now, I want to be clear. Rashi puts an unbelievable. Rashi said, look at the word Rashi lamata, right? Kamil mala, kamil mata. Rashi says mefiach bikoil. Somebody's passing gas loudly. Why did Rashi add the word bikoil? Because Rashi is saying that if somebody's passing gas, but they're doing silently, meaning they're doing it loinsa and they're doing it silently, that person is not the same kind of ra. That person is not the same kind of mechur. It's a very interesting. Rashi puts in the word kol. There's no indication in the Gemara that you have to say the word kol. Rashi puts it in, I think, to make that distinction that if somebody had to pass gas, they had no option, but they did so quietly, then they wouldn't be considered Ra or Mafur. Okay, continues the Gemara. Bless you. Was that by insight? Okay, so Gemara continues. The Gemara continues. The Amar Rav Zera. Rav Zera learned as follows. The Amar Rav Zera Ham Milsa. Rav Zera used to say the following thing. If loyally Beir Hamnuna, says I absorbed this idea in the teachings of Rav Hamnuna, v'tequila lei kikol tamudei, and it's like mamish worth it, like my whole learning. And Rashi says why? Because because he was a sneezer, snowing in the seven dwarves. When I grew up, it didn't have the names of the dwarves like they have today. But nowadays, I read my kids snowing in the seven dwarves, and one of the names was Sneezy. So Rashi says that the reason Reb Zera loved this Vart, the reason why it was so important to him was like worth like all of his learning, because he had, a problem. He used to sneeze a lot. So one of Reb Zera said, "What's the line?" As follows: somebody sneezes during davening, simin yafalai. It's a good simin. So remember what we said before: is a simin ra, is nikra mechur. That's obviously only about passing wind from below. But somebody sneezing from the nose, it's not an issue at all. It's in fact a simin yafa. It's a wonderful thing. Why? Just like he's having a wonderful experience below, because, and I don't know if this is actually scientifically true or not, but the Mefarshim explain, the Ritva others say that when somebody sneezes, it strengthens the limbs. I have no idea. But what they're saying is as follows, or if Zera learned from Rabbi Hanun is the following. Just like they're making him feel good down below. So too, they're going to give him a nachas ruach upstairs. So we ended up in a situation now where we've explained, or at least attempted to explain, Rebbe's behavior. He was giek, he was piek, he was belching, and he was yawning, but that was all oines. Misatesh was only about the nose. But we still have the question about roik, spitting. We already said that you're not allowed to spit, and here we know that Rebbe did spit. So how do we answer up that question? Ela roik, aroik, kasha. With regards to spitting, we still have a question. The more answers roik, aroik, namele kasha. When it comes to spitting, it's also not a question. Why? Why is spitting not a question? Efshik Rav Yehuda. Because maybe one like Rav Yehuda. The Rav Yehuda, because we learned that Rav Yehuda said as follows: if somebody was standing to daven Shemona Esrei and he had to spit, he has to get rid of phlegm that's in his mouth. So the halacha is mavlir b'talisai. He should spit it into his talus. Vim talus nohu, and if it's a nice talus, mavlir ba'afrikususai. Then he should put it into his head covering. His head covering, I guess, had some sort of a rag, etc. How they used to do the head coverings, and that's where he should get rid of the spit. So the Gemara says that there was options, right? You don't have to just spit on the ground. So what does it mean when Rebbe would spit? Now we're saying that somebody who's roik is kilu roik b'fnei melech. It's like a very bad thing. It's like you're spitting in front of the king. So the answer must be that Rebbe, when he was roik, he was doing it either b'talisai or b'afkursusai. And what we're saying here that you're not supposed to be roik, because if you do, it's like being roik b'fnei melech. That's if you're not using that. If you're not doing that kind of a spit. So here there's a Yerushalmi. It seems to have a bit of a different issue. The Ritva here is channeling Rabbeinu Yaina, literally quotes the entire Rabbeinu Yaina. And what we basically end up with here is as follows: a couple of things. Number one, when we're dealing with the situation where, as Rashi says, that Kedir Yehuda la b'afrik Sudar Sheberoishay, some sort of handkerchief or rag that they had in the head, on the hat, and that's where he would do the spinning. If you look at the Rabbeinu Yaina here, the Rabbeinu Yaina is on Tez Pavam base on the Daf Arif. uh, which I now understand is the old style of the Rif, because I saw some Gemara um, that has different pages for the Rif, but the old Rif, it's a Tesvav base. So Rashi says, the Rebbeinu brings down Rashi, that for Kususa is the Keveab Shembaroshay, and there was some sort of a handkerchief in there. But the Rebbeinu says, I don't understand. Kashli, the Hech Shaykh Hanem Mavli B'Keveab. What are you like spitting into your hat? Says the Vadi Asal Hesa Keveab. How did you get the spit into your hat? Right? He says you took off the hat and spit into it. How are you taking off the hat during davening? Rabbeinu doesn't like it. Rabbeinu instead answers up like he says that you know what it's talking about. It's like a high guy. A high guy says Afrik Yususa is not in the hat, but it's who a beggar a tachton. It's sort of like an undershirt that you use it under your shirt. He brings riots to that, and that's what it is where you're putting the spit. Either way, the point being that we have now an answer for Rebbe. Rebbe, when he spit, he wasn't spitting like on the ground or in some way, but he was doing it in a concealed manner. And here I'll just read to you from the Ritva, but it's the same thing as Rebbe Yono, which is very interesting. Is they bring down a word here from Rav Shmuel HaNagid. Yeah, Rav Shmuel HaNagid was the big general of the Muslim armies. Yeah. So, and in the back of Brachot, you see what he wrote is in the Avaya Talmud. Yeah. So, what does the Ritva say? What does the Rebbe Yono say as follows? Nobody's supposed to be spitting during davening. Okay, and it's not like there are people kratzing around like that's not how it works. No, but if it's a situation where somebody's an inus, they have spit, they can't do anything about it. So then you could put it or mismoila or etc. In some sort of a tissue. That's the kinds of things. But if somebody's being roikek, they're like doing it willingly, where it's not bothering them, it's not hurting their kavana. So then in that situation, then somebody is not permitted to do so. But the reason we allow somebody who has spit and he has nothing to do, he can't do anything about it, and it's just making him gross, so then he can get rid of it because of the fact that otherwise he can't focus on his davening. Now you might say, well, let him just swallow it. Again, it's not a necessarily healthy thing to swallow up one's own spit. So therefore, for reasons, maybe that is the reason we are more makel here. Finish the Gemara. And the Gemara says as follows: Rav Ina Havik Rav Ashi. Rav Ina was once davening behind Rav Ashi, right? The two main people who were responsible for the Talmud Bavlis, the ones that were davening together. Rav Ina was standing behind Rav Ashi. His davening he had to spit. Pascal Achar, so he spit behind him. Right? That's why it's important to know that Rav Ina was behind Rav Ashi. Right? Because if Rav Ina was in front of Rav Ashi, and spit behind him, he would have been spitting at Rav Ashi. So this is not the story. Rav Ina was behind Rav Ashi. And he had spit, and he spit it behind him, meaning nothing to do with the Rashi. So Amalei, Rav Ashi said to Ravina, says, why don't you put it into the Africa Susai, into your hat, like Rashi said, Rabbeinu, from Rabbi going, put it into your undershirt, like why don't you do something, why are you spitting out behind you? He says, Amalei Anina Datoi. He says, I'm like an istinus. It grosses me out to be putting it into my clothing with spit, but no way. As I put it behind me. Now that we would say a tissue, right? A tissue. Nobody would require spitting into your clothing or things like this. Of course, nowadays it would be into a tissue. That would be the only appropriate way to do so. Continues the Gemara as follows. Hamashmiya kala b'tfilasei. So one of the things that we had said was that somebody who raises his voice during davening, somebody raises his voice during davening is like a believer of little faith. Why is that? That's only if somebody is not able. When do we learn this? Is only when somebody is able to be mekaveh, right? He's able to have kavana when he's doing the tefillah b'lachash. But if he can't have kavana, there's no ability to mechaven when he's doing the tefillah b'lachash, then mutter. Then he'll be mutter to say the Shemona Esrei aloud. And this is only talking about by yachid. But if it will be a situation of tefillah b'tzibur, then he will be coming along and confusing the tzibur. What do you mean he will be coming along and confusing the tzibur? Because of the fact that he will be davening out loud. He's not the shliach tzibur. He's davening out loud for himself. So that would be confusing for the crowd. That would be confusing for everybody else. So the halacha, this is in fact the case that somebody who's mashmiya kerla mitzvah when he's davening yichidus in order to be able to attain a level of kavanah, he will be permitted. But in fact, to do so with a tzibur, that would not be permitted because he is going to be confusing the tzibur, going to be causing them to not daven so well. Now we have another Gemara that is adjacent, but it brings down a very famous sugya of brachos. I'm sorry, Ksubas Kuf Yud Aleph. The Gemara says, Kuf Yud Aleph, yeah, Rabbi Abba Havi Kamashtam Mined Rabbi Huda, Havi Kamboy Lamesik Lar Yisrael. Rabbi Abba wanted to make Aliyah, but he was hiding from Rabbi Huda. Why? Rabbi Huda, because Rabbi Huda holds Kala'ilam Bavel Eretz Yisrael Ever Basei, whoever makes Aliyah, who goes from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel is ever an Asay. Shneimar Bavel Yavaya V'Shama Yu Ad Yom Bhakti Yosam, because it says you should be in Bavel, and from there I will remember you on the time that it will be appropriate to remember it. Om Hashem. Now, um, just to mention quickly that this comes up in Subas Kofyot on the fact that Rav Zera wanted to make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, and he was also afraid of Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda was very famous. Shita, you're not allowed to make Aliyah, and it's over a lot. Now, of course, the Park of Bavel Yavayu has nothing to do with people making Aliyah. It has to do with the Kalim, as we pointed out. When we did our series on Tzionim, etc., maybe 5 odd years ago. So none of that is the simple pshat of this pasuk. Should also point out that when the Rambam brings down Baveli Avayo, the Isser of Rabbi Yehuda to make Aliyah from Bavel anywhere else, Ram doesn't bring it down like the way Rabbi Yehuda actually said it. He doesn't say from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, but rather from Bavel to Sha'ar HaRatzos. Another thing to bear in mind as well. But we can't go more into that sugya now. We don't have time. Other than to say that Rabbi Yehuda had a famous shita, and various students of his who wanted to make Aliyah had to deal with Rabbi Yehuda and his anger, so therefore they avoided him when they wanted to make Aliyah. Nevertheless, says the Gemara, what did Rabbi Abba say before he made Aliyah? He said, Ezel, Omar, Ezel, ve'eshma minei, milsam beis vada, v'ater epik. Before I leave, I wanted to say one more shir. So Azal Ashkeche Latana the Tani Kamed Rabbi Yehuda. So he went and he found a Tana who was teaching in front of Rabbi Yehuda. We've had already many times now. We've seen that there were various Tanoim, even during the days of Amiron, who would be teaching various teachings that they had remembered because they were memorizers, these Tanoim. Even though they are in the time of the Amiron, they still had retained that job. So what was he saying? Somebody who was in the middle of the davening and he had to what do you call pass wind. The mountain he should wait until the smell is gone. Then he should go back and daven again. Igid the Amre, and there are those who say a bit differently. Somebody who's in the middle of the davening and he wants to be passing wind. He should distance himself 4 arms away, and there he should be misatesh. Then he should wait until the wind passes, and then he should daven. What should he say? Rebbeinu Shalom, Yitzartonim the Kavim. It's not actually Yatar, but it's a sort of a play on it. Yitzartonim the Kavim Kalim Kalum Gol Vedula Fnecha Chempersenu Chlimasenu V'Chayenu V'Charisenu V'Miselea. Right, you create us all these various orifices, etc. You know that we are mamish nothing, and in the end we're a bunch of maggots. And she continue to daven on the place where he had finished, the place where he was placing. Amalei, either like Basti, El Shmer, David said, die. Right? If I would have only heard this word, die, it would have been enough. Rabbi was very excited about hearing this word. But I have to explain a little bit more, another minute, what we mean. But the basic understanding for the moment is that when Rabbi Ab went to go hear this word, he heard about Nisadish, not of the sneezing variety, but of passing wind variety. And basically, what the halacha is you have to wait till the smell goes away before you can continue davening. And the halacha is that you could continue from Makam Shapasak. The halacha is you can continue from where you and the halacha is that you can continue from where you had stopped. And before you continue, you make this other little addition, this other little tefillah. Rashi and Taisus both point out that this little tefillah you say in between, right? Miyad, the empty tefillah, so you say this in between before you go back to the place that you were placing. Fine. Tanarabanan. Haya yashem betalisai. We've come across this already. This kind of idea we've talked about again on the Chav Hey. Somebody who's sleeping in his talis, for any doesn't want to put out his head because it's very cold. So if he should put the talis by his neck and he should say Kriyash. Remember, in those days they slept in the Arab, they slept in the nude. So the question is, and we're not talking about somebody who's doing the Meiri, right? Where he's like Kriyash Malamita, Samach Lamita. So here he's literally in the bed, he has to say Kriyash Malamita. So what should he do? He should make the talis like a covering by his neck, and then he should say Kriyash Malamita. But some say no, you should put the talis further down by the heart, and then he should say Kriyash Malamita. Tanakama, Arei Liboy. Right, so everything more, but according to Tanakama, you put the blanket up to your neck and you say the Shema, but it's not a problem because your heart is seeing your erva. So the Gemara answers to Sarah Liba Reis Ever, but the Oza Reis Ever is okay, it's not a problem. Liba Reis Ever is not an issue. Now the Gemara continues, and we get part two of this kind of idea of the story about being chayzer, where you're chayzer to, which we've already had a little bit already on Chav Gimel. Somebody who's traveling, somebody who's walking in a disgusting area. So Ravuna said in the name of Rabbi Yechon, you put your hand on your mouth and you continue to say Shema. Right? It's not my God, right? It's not a normal way of speaking, so he's just like stunned. If Rabbi Yechon told me this halach, I would never listen to him. Meaning, if you go to Bachmat Tenafetz, you're going to be saying the Shema. It can't be. Ikidami is another version. Another version of Rabbi Chana says the name of Shimon Levi. Somebody who's going in a disgusting place. So right here, it's not saying the name of Rabbi Yechon. Rabbi Chana is saying the name of Shimon Levi. Again jumped. Let's say, if Rabbi Shimon Levi would have said it with his mouth, to me, I would never listen to him anyways. So the Gemara says, well, I understand. Rav Huna is saying over the testimony, either from Shimon Levi or from Rabbi Yechanan. But how could it be? Me, Amar Rav Huna, how does Rav Huna really say this? We know that a Talmud Chacham is also to stand in a disgusting place, while a fish actually believe hero Torah, because it's impossible for Talmud Chacham to stand without thinking about learning. And therefore you can't stand in a disgusting place because you're going to be thinking about learning. And yet you're saying that Rabbi Huna is quoting Rabbi Yechon of Shimon Levi, standing in a disgusting place, you can say the Shema. So the Gemara says, like Kasha, Kamba'im, and Kamba'halach. There's a difference between standing and going. If you're standing in a place, so then the disgusting thing is going to come inside your brains. So then you're also to Maharit learning, you'll be also to say Kriya Shema. But if you're going through, you're passing through, so then you can say the Kriya Shema so long as you're covering your mouth with your hand. Says, okay, fine. I understand Rav Huna's position. Now you don't have a steer from Rav Huna. But could it be true that Rabbi Yechanan really says this? Rabbi Yechanan really say what you just said? Rabbi Yechanan says the name of Rabbi Yechanan. In all places, it's mutter to be mahar and Torah, except for the Beis HaMerkaz. This is Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan says you're always able to be thinking about learning except for a disgusting place, right? Like the Beis HaMerkaz, or Beis HaKisei, right? Those are disgusting places. Those are makom mitzvah places, and you're not allowed to be thinking about learning over there. So how could it be? Rabbi Yechanan is saying that you can say Shema, just cover your hand with your mouth. And if you want to answer, same thing over here. That this Rabbi Yechanan is saying that it's also to be mahar with the return Beis HaMerkaz, Beis HaKisei. That's the mama oimei, but not by mahalech. But this cannot be. Because the Bas Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Avo was going along the road, and he was going behind Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Avo was saying Kriya Shema. When he got to a disgusting place, he was quiet. After they passed the disgusting place, he said to Rabbi Yechanan, then where should I go back to? He said, if you finished enough, if you had said enough, and now it's like you're finished, able to finish the whole Shema. So you go back to the beginning of the Shema. So you see here, Araya, that Rabbi Yechanan holds that when you go Makom Matanafas, that you are able to say Kriya Shema as long as you're covering over your mouth. So if that's the case, Rabbi Yechanan holds that, then we have no question. This idea of Rabbi Yechanan saying the Beis HaMerkaz, Beis HaKisei, that you can't have hero for Torah, it's obviously talking about something different. Because clearly you see Rabbi Yechanan holds you are able to go through Makom HaTanefes and say the Shema. So no, it's not a right at all by Rabbi Yechanan's position. I think Amalei. This is what Rabbi Yechanan was saying. Really, Rabbi Yechanan was saying, I don't hold to this. I hold to you perfectly able to have continued on saying Shema in the Makom HaTanefes. But l'didcha, the sphere lachem shayis, kedei likma skula chayz l'rush. But according to you, that held that you were not able to say the Shema, so you stopped saying the Shema, right? Imagine Rabbi Yechon's like giving credence to the student Shitu, disagrees with him. So Ravo stopped saying the Shema. So he's saying, you stopped saying the Shema. And therefore, you want to know where to go back to. It depends how long you stop for. If you stop for such a long time, so then you go back to the beginning. And if you stopped for a short period of time, then you can go back to where you had left off. The Gemara then brings down a raya. Tani Kav Sidra Puna, Tani Kav Sidra, because we have a raya for both. Tani Kav Sidra Puna Malcolm, I said, that was Minikli Yondi, I'll Piv and Yikar Karik Kriyashma. What we have one raya that sounds like Rav Huna, one raya that sounds like Rav Chizda. We have one raya that sounds like Rav Huna. Someone's going in a disgusting place. Miniach Yodi, Al Pivi Karik Kriyashma. He just puts his hand over his mouth. He continues on saying Shema. Tani Kav Sidra Rav Chizda. We have a raya like Rav Chizda. Malcolm, and then when he goes to a disgusting place, he doesn't say Shema. But then if he was going and already saying Shema, he needs to stop. What should he do if he didn't stop? If somebody didn't stop and they kept on saying Shema, again, according to the Rav Chizda learns, the guy when I'm going to give them bad laws. It's like they're dragging sins along, but not with ropes. The ropes that are dragging them along with sin are not strong ropes. They could have stopped, and they didn't. Which we're using Sanhedrin for other areas. So they're just making the words of Hashem disgusting by just keeping on saying them in a disgusting area. And what if they stop? And what is the schar? The incredible schar, because remember, Ravo himself stops. So this is what he holds of. You'll have a long life. Have a wonderful day.